Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today I'm really excited because we get back to work on our small block Chevy build with part 3, Clean, Camshaft, Crankshaft, also known as the 3 C's of engine building. Before we go any further, let's thank our amazing sponsors, Summit Racing. Summit Racing has been with us for a bunch of engines now. They are my absolute favorite place to get parts, so make sure you buy all your speed parts at summitracing.com. Like I said, today is going to be taking it off the truck, getting out of plastic, put it on a stand, washing it. Today we're going to paint it as well. You don't really need to do that at this exact moment, but I figured this is probably about as good a time as any, so don't get overspray on critical things or on your heads if you want those to remain aluminum, things like that. This is when I prefer to paint engines, and that's just my personal preference. This is a really exciting day. We finally get to see that camshaft and crankshaft sitting in our engine and rotating about. It is a very exciting day, so I hope you follow me along. Let's jump into it. So it's about a month later, and L&R Engine Machining whipped up my block for me and did an outstanding job. They even painted it in primer for me and tapped the oil galley plugs with actual threads instead of just relying on a press fit, but don't worry about that. We'll worry about that later. The point is they did an amazing job, wrapped it up, all ready to go. But, and even Derek at L&R, who you should definitely call if you need your engine machined, told me that the assembler of the engine is responsible for the cleanliness of the engine. You can't rely on a machine shop to clean your engine for you. You have to do it. I'm going to show you exactly how we get that done. So first, go ahead and take our plastic wrap off very carefully. When you're using a razor blade, be very careful. You don't want to scratch any surfaces. There we go. This looks amazing. Remember what it looked like before? This looks so much better. It's actually kind of insane. So I'm going to show you what I mean by cleaning it. You might look at the surface and be like, oh no, it's clean, throw it together, it's all good, but look at this. See that right there? That could totally ruin things. Could be fine, but why take the chance? That is definitely some metal dust, and no, that's not the machinist's fault. All engines come looking like this back from the machine shop, so that's why we need to clean it. So not in direct sunlight, you'll notice it's about 5:25 in the afternoon in the fall, so the sun is not directly on my block, and we're just gonna rinse it off. I know it might sound a little strange to be putting water on cast iron like this, and if you let it dry, it will flash rust, so you wanna keep the block nice and moist while you're washing it. So make sure the block is nice and moistened down, and then all I have in this bucket is just some hand soap or laundry detergent works and water, a nice clean terry towel, and get into every cylinder bore. You can even rinse off in between cylinders here. And we're just gonna soap that up and get all that machine grit out of our cylinders, out of the lifter galleys, out of everywhere we basically can, because we don't know if there's metal in there, and that's not a risk you really want to be willing to take. So go ahead and just soap up your engine, flip it over, do it from the other side. I'm not going to make you guys watch me clean the entire engine, but this is basically all you do. There's really nothing much to it. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing for the main bearings, where they're going to eventually sit, because we don't want any little shards or chips of metal. And some people argue that's what an oil filter's for, but you know, I just don't like that idea at all. It's pretty good. Now that it's all been soaped up and wiped down, go ahead and rinse her off real good. Get inside the oil galleys like this on the front of the engine. Oh yeah. You can't be too thorough with your rinsing. Do not be afraid to really get in there. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it back over, get the rest of the suds off. I apologize if my camera angles aren't exactly perfect. You kind of have to work fast. Again, you really don't want to have this thing rust, and it'll pretty much flash rust instantly. And you want to avoid that, obviously, on all the machine surfaces. So now we're at the stage where the block is just wet. It's not soapy or anything. It is just wet. So now what we're going to do is take our good friend WD-40 and just hose it down, because WD-40 displaces water, prevents rusting, and will help displace the water. It will replace the water film that's on there. It lowers the surface tension of that water and enables the water to run off without rusting. If I could dip it in WD-40, I probably would. So there's no such thing as being too aggressive with the WD-40. I'm not gonna make you watch me do this entire thing, but it's gonna basically look more like this. And then when it's finally done dripping, I'm gonna move it inside of the shop. So now we're gonna move on to painting our block, which is basically this section here, but I wanna focus on where the cylinder head mates, because what we're gonna do is take some cleanser or degreaser. I have this solvent, works pretty good, and a clean microfiber. Spray it on the towel itself, and then I'm gonna clean this surface off here, the head surface, because I need the tape for masking purposes to stick to the block itself. And then on the actual block surface itself, I'm gonna hose down the side, because the block has WD-40 on it and our paint isn't going to adhere to it. The solvent's actually taken a bit of the primer off, but I'm totally okay with that. So go ahead and clean off all of the metal surfaces that aren't going to be painted and are just going to be taped, because we don't want paint getting on there. We want the tape to adhere. And you could paint your engine pretty much at any time. You can wait until it's fully assembled. I like doing it at this point just because there's not a lot of things to tape over. There's not a lot of things in the way. All right, we're all taped up and plugged up. I have these little silicone plugs I put there and anywhere that leads into an oil galley in our engine. You'll also hear that I have my extraction fan on for the shop, because the stuff we're using today is actually pretty serious. This is engine enamel, and you definitely want to wear one of these as well while you're working with this stuff, and just follow the instructions on the can. And it varies make to make, so just read the instructions. As far as the color goes, well, that's why you need to be subscribed, because my subscribers actually got to pick the color on this build, because everyone gets upset with me when I paint my engines black. That's my preferred color. But I let you guys pick, and you picked Chevy Orange, probably the most common small block Chevy color, but hey, I'm a man of the people, so we're doing it. And Chevy Orange won by a very significant margin. Give this a shake for a minute or so, and a link is down below the description to respirator 2. I definitely recommend wearing one. This is serious stuff. So just like the instructions, we're gonna do 2 light coats. So don't worry too much if it doesn't look great on the first coat like this. That's all I'm gonna give it. So now it's been about 10 minutes, I'm gonna give it another light coat. So it's been another 10 minutes, and now I'm gonna give its third and final coat. This one's gonna be a little bit thicker to hopefully even everything out. There we go. Any more, it's gonna start running, so don't do that. Something my dad told me once always rings true when I'm doing something like this. He said, it'll be as good as you want it to be. So to keep that in mind when you're making your engine look all pretty. So it has been about an hour, so now we can remove our masking very carefully. And I've always found it's better to kind of peel it away from where the paint is. Well, look at that. My audience does pick a really nice color. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the rest of this tape. So before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take a careful look at our camshaft bearings here, and we're gonna pay attention to this oil hole. So if you get your cam bearings installed by your machine shop, just double check and make sure this oil hole actually goes into your oil galleys. You'll be able to see if it does or doesn't, because this hole will just go to flat, straight metal instead of an actual oil resource, and you want to have that oil for your camshaft, obviously. So go ahead and check that for all 5 of your cam bearings. It's pretty easy to see. So the very first thing I put in an engine is actually the camshaft. I know people like to do it a little bit differently, but I've always found this is the easiest way to put the camshaft in, so you get it just right and don't gall any surfaces. This is our camshaft sent over by our friends at Summit Racing, and there is our part number. I don't have all the info for you, but I'll get the cam card out just as soon as we can. Let's take a look at this Made in USA beast. Oh yeah, So this is a really hot street cam. This is not like a race car camshaft. This is going to give us plenty of drivability, but has a decent amount of low end torque. That's really more of what I'm interested in a build like this. And there is literally a gazillion camshafts out of there, and there is a bunch of different reasons why you would want to pick one over the other. Here is our cam card, in case you are interested in that information, or you can just look up our part number. Basically, these numbers with a bunch of valve overlap and how much the cam stays open is going to give me a decent amount of low-end torque and that lopey chop-chop idle we all love. So that's basically all you need to know about the cam card. If you want to go into further detail, I've left a link down below in the description to this exact camshaft. You can take a look at it yourself. I've also left a link down there to a resource that will help you pick out a camshaft, because what you want might be different from what I want, and that's okay. The next thing I'm going to do is hose down my camshaft with solvent or carb spray, acetone, something like that. And we're going to clean off all of the surfaces, especially the bearing surfaces, just because we don't know where this has been. There could be something on there that ruins our day, and we don't want that to happen. So just give it a nice clean off and blow it off with some compressed air if there's any kind of little lints left behind, but this is looking pretty good. See, look how much dirt came off of that. Quite a lot. We don't want that in our engine. So now we're ready to put our camshaft in, but before we do that, we need to lubricate it up with this. It is Lucas engine assembly lube. I really like this stuff. You could just use the stuff that came with the camshaft, but I like this because it's a little easier to use for me. And you just want to really sauce it up on the bearings, because these are actually going to make contact with your bearings, and you can smooth that out if you want, or just leave it globbed on. And then don't forget to sauce up the gear for the distributor. And then just kind of go down the line and be nice and heavy with the amount of lubrication you are putting on your camshaft, because we want it nice and lubed up. And then we're ready to insert it, at least 2 bearings worth. So when you're putting this in the engine, sometimes you'll come in at like an angle. It's exaggerated for demonstration. And just straighten it out. You want to be as perpendicular as you can, and then come on the back side of it and kind of help the camshaft along. And go slow, be ginger and deliberate. Yeah, it's looking really nice. And then as I'm inserting the camshaft into the block, keep saucing up bearings and lobes all the way to the end. You can't use too much lubrication, so keep that in mind as you are going. It's better to be over-lubed than under-lubed. So as you can see, I've already removed my main caps here, which I've already shown in a previous video. You don't have to do this step in order to get your camshaft in. You can leave the main caps in if you like, but I thought I'd take them out of the way so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. So what we can do is just reach in there and kind of help the camshaft along. And just be really gentle. It's not a race. There we go. This is looking really nice. And if the camshaft's not going, don't force it. Just reorientate it a little bit and see if it'll slide in for you. This is why I like putting in the camshaft like this, because then I can kind of help it along. Always found that to be a little easier. Yeah. And then it'll just slide into place like this. And that looks very excellent. You might notice that the lobes are a little dry. That's okay. You can lube them now. So I'm just going to give them a little bit of extra lubrication. You can even turn it over while you're lubricating it, just so you get every single lobe surface nice and sauced up. So when the lifters eventually meet the camshaft, we won't have a problem. There we go. That's sauced up right, nice and good. And I like to do the gear too for the distributor. Well, all right, our camshaft is installed and nice and sauced up, and we can move on. So the next thing we're gonna do is put in our crankshaft. Now, before we get to that stage, we need to put some bearings in. And here are the bearings I have selected. There's our part number. And the really cool thing about these is they're actually a Summit part, and the link is down below in the description. So what Summit does is contract with this company and sells it under their Summit branding. So you end up with a name brand bearing that is really, really, really nice for a nice affordable price as well. And the link is down below in the description, like I said. And these are tri-metal bearings. I always go with tri-metal bearings. If you're wondering what that is, I put my company name on there and then my phone number, which I've scribbled out. So when they're at the machine shop balancing the crankshaft, these can't get misplaced and then I never see them again, because these are ridiculously nice bearings. So every bearing will look like this. Some will have a hole in them, some won't. The whole ones go in the engine themselves, and that's the ones we're interested in right now. So what we're gonna do is grab one of our bearings for the block, the one with the holes in them, and we're gonna clean it very well with carburetor spray or solvent or something that gets it very clean, because we don't know where these have been, and we don't want a dirty bearing in our engine. So for every bearing we put in this engine and the caps, we're gonna clean it just like this. And if you didn't think there was any dirt on there, there was a little bit. So it's a good idea to clean your bearings before you put them in the engine. So clean every single bearing like we just did. So we're gonna clean this surface now, because there can't be any lubrication between the bearing and the block. This has to be nice and clean and dry. So again, we're gonna take some carburetor spray, spray it on a terry towel, and we're just gonna wipe that saddle, getting all the grease, and if there's any dirt, I don't think so, out of there. And that looks very nice. Once it's dried off and looks very snazzy, what we can do is take a cleaned, gloved hand and just wipe it around like this to make sure that there's nothing there, and there isn't. It looks very, very clean and grease-free. At this stage, I like to clean where the caps come in contact with the block too. Why not? We'll just give it all nice clean. Perfect. And then we can take our nice and clean bearing with our tang facing this tang right here. It only goes in the one way. And make sure you grabbed a bearing with a hole in it. And we can just push that in place. Just like that. Looking excellent now. So you know the bearing is in its home when this surface here and this surface here are nice and even and level. I can't even feel a little ridge right there. So you know that this bearing is in its home, because this side as well as the other side are nice and flat along with its saddle. That looks amazing. And just do the exact same thing for 2, 3, and 4. But 5 is a little bit different. I'm gonna show you how to do that one. So number 5, I've already cleaned out this bearing surface as well as the surface the rear main seal rides in. So this whole thing is very clean, as well as the bearing. So we're gonna take the tang part and put it there. You can also line it up with the hole. We're gonna put that in. So it's basically the same thing, but a little bit different because it's kind of different looking. Just push it in like that. Absolutely fantastic. And then just go around like this with your thumbs and just seat it into place. Yeah, that looks really good. And again, you can tell that it's in place because this surface and the block will be completely flush. You won't be able to feel a difference. Like I can run my fingers over right here and I can't feel a difference. So I know that this bearing is installed properly. So before we put our crankshaft in and our caps for it, I want to mention this plug down here at the end of my fingertip at the bottom of this well actually governs oil control, and that is going to send oil to your filter so it can be filtered. If you don't have this plug, you need to replace it or take it to the machine shop and have them do it. Truthfully, this is something your machine shop should have in there, so you might want to check it before you leave the machine shop, because if you don't have this plug, oil will never go to your filter, and it'll never be filtered and cleaned like it should be, and oil will just circulate throughout your engine, and you won't even know there's necessarily a problem. So that's really something you need to look out for. So here's our crankshaft back from the machine shop, and I had it balanced. I always recommend at least balancing your crankshaft. This was brand new from Summit Racing, and the part number is located down below in the description along with the link. And it still needed to be balanced. Every single new crankshaft I ever get, I always have balanced. And if you need it ground 10 under, it needs to be rebalanced again anyway. So just always get your crankshaft balanced. It's not very expensive, and I promise it pays off. And keep in mind, we are doing a stroker kit. So this is what makes the stroker kit. This crankshaft actually increases the amount of stroke inside of the bore. So if you're not doing a stroker kit, you need to get the stock crank. This is a stroker crank. So what we need to do, just like everything else we've done so far today, is clean it off. The bearing surfaces with some carburetor spray or solvent. and just clean that up really nice. Do that for every surface on the crankshaft. Just hose it down with solvent or brake clean, something like that, and just get every surface very, very clean. Once you're very sure of its cleanliness, go ahead and get some compressed air, and be really careful because I have a metal tip here, and put it right here on this hole, and blow that all out. Make sure this thing is nice and dry, but also clean, and all of the oil holes are blown out with compressed air. So the next thing we're gonna do is worry about our rear main seal. This is where it sits, and I've already cleaned that very thoroughly with some carburetor spray. And what I'm gonna do is just take a little bit of RTV, link down below in the description, and just put it right here where the rear main is going to sit. And that's just gonna give it its best chance of sealing. Plus, it kind of acts like a little bit of a grease fit, because you're not really supposed to put rubber things on dry. And that's all this is just a rubber seal, and I've already cleaned it very thoroughly out of the bag, and there's a link down below in the description to this 2-piece. If you have 1 piece, it's going to be different. Now, you might wonder which way it goes in, because of course you could put it in backward, but that's not correct. What is correct is you'll see this cross-thatching, and it needs to point to the back of the block. See how it has this little, I don't know, indent that comes in? That's actually what's going to ride on the surface of the back of a crank. So we can just put that in, just like a bearing, and put that in just like that. That fits really nice, actually. That is a nice piece. So that is going to be 1/2 of our rear main seal. So just like our bearings, we can tell when it's installed properly because it'll be completely flush with the block surface, like this one is. Next, we're going to take some of our assembly lube, and we're just going to put it on the bearing for the block side. And you don't need to go crazy on it. You can just spread that up almost to the top of the bearing, not quite though, because we don't want that to overflow and get on the back side of the bearing. That could potentially spin a bearing. Just like that is perfectly perfect, and do that for all of our bearings. And then also put lube on this thrust surface here on the number 5 bearing. But what I wanted to show too was putting a little bit of lubrication on this side of our rear main seal, because we don't want the engine to start up dry, tearing that seal up. Look at that. That looks really good. So that is nice and lubricated, and we're going to do the same thing to the top half of it later. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but make sure there's some lubrication on the back side of the thrust bearing as well as the front. So make sure that's got some sauce on it. There we go, that's better. So now is an exciting part. We can take our nice and clean crankshaft and drop it into our engine, lining up our bearing surfaces and going in perfectly parallel with the block. Just like that, and let it sit. Do not spin the crankshaft at this time. I will tell you when to spin it. Now is not the time. Just let it sit the way it is. So now that our crankshaft's in, we can put our studs in. If you are using bolts, you do not have to do this step, obviously, but we're using studs. And you can do this before you put the crankshaft in, but I like to do it after because it is really easy to accidentally bonk the crank against these studs, and then you'll have a problem. And obviously be very gentle when you're putting these in. Do not just, knock them against the wear surface for the crankshaft. We want to just be kind of ginger. And then they don't have a torque spec either. You just kind of, as tight as you can get it with your fingers like this. And that's it. And do that for all of them. And if you have a 2-bolt, you only have this type. But if you have a 4 like us, put the short ones on the outside and the long ones on the inside. So here are our main caps. They need to go on next. And what we're going to do is just do this for every single one of them. Take it up. Clean the whole cap off, especially the bearing wear surface, where the bearing sits. Look how nice and gleaming that is. Oh, it's perfect. I'm going to give the rest of the cap a bath too. Why not? Why not? There we go. Look at that. Nice and gleaming. Do that for all of these. And then I've just cleaned its bearing. Notice that this bearing doesn't have a hole in it. These are what actually go into the caps. We're going to line the tang up, just like we did on the block. Just a little more jiggly, because it's not a big old engine block. Make sure that's nice and seated down. And again, you can tell it is in its home because the bearing top and the cap on both sides will be completely flush, just like this one is. And then we're going to take some lubrication, put it in the middle just like that. And then just kind of wipe it to near the top, but not quite, just like that. That looks excellent. And this cap is ready to be installed. Go ahead and do this for all the other caps as well. And then we can put our caps on, making sure we get the orientation and the number correct. It's easy for number 1 because it's the only one that looks like that. That's why I labeled all of them with arrows pointing where they should go. I'm going to put on number 1 first and then just go down the line. I'm not going to tighten them, I'm just putting them down. And I've chose to film this one because it is the easiest. You can see I have my little arrow right there. Also, the lock or tang will go to the other corresponding tang. And you just go ahead and be very ginger and then just kind of drop that down in place like that. You don't need to force it on or anything, just let it sit. Very nice. And just go ahead and put that on for all the other caps. And of course, number 5 is very special, so we're going to treat it specially. We're going to grab our bearing. I've already cleaned everything and just put that in its home. I like to do the tang first and then just put the other side in, like that. And again, you can see that it is in its home because the bearing surface and the cap surface are level. The next thing I'm going to do is on the surface where the rear main seal rides, I'm just going to put a thin film of RDV, just like I did on the other side. Just enough, just giving it a little help. And then of course, make sure you put it in correctly with the lip facing inward, just like that. Look at that. Ish. That looks excellent. Now we just need to lube it. Go ahead and lube the bearing like normal, a little extra because the bearing's so wide. Go almost up to the top, but not quite. And then make sure you get the bearing thrust surface on the back side as well. And this side of the rear main seal, because we don't want that stirring up dry, like I said earlier. And then do this surface too. You might have missed that I was doing this on the block earlier, but I am putting lubrication here. It is nice and lubed up, so it's ready to go on our engine. Before we put the cap on both sides of the rear main, what I like to do, and some people disagree with this, and that's all right, is just put a little bit of RTV, a little difficulty with my finger in there, right there. Right just there. You don't want to get any on the crank, but you want to be just like that. And do that for both sides. This will give the two-piece rear its best shot of sealing. And then we can just grab our 5th cap and just gingerly place that. Oh yeah, just like that. That just fit in perfect. Look at that. That is something to be proud of. But don't spin the engine yet. So you know that meme on the internet where it's washers are directional, change my mind? Well, these actually are. They're very special washers. You can see they have a beveled edge that's facing the camera right now and a flat edge. The flat edge goes down, and I'm going to coat both sides of it with fastener lube. That's what it is expecting. So both sides of this need to be lubricated, and then it can just be put on the studs like that. Go ahead and put on all your washers in the correct direction and lubrication. You can lube up these studs a bit too with lubrication. That looks really nice. And then we can put our nuts on. Now, if you have bolts, this is where you join us. If you have bolts, it's the same thing. Lubricate the underside of the bolt head before you put it on down there. And I'm not tightening anything yet. I'm just placing nuts with lubrication on the threads and on the bottom side of the nuts. And you can do the same thing with bolts, like I said earlier. There we go. Go ahead and just lightly put all the nuts on. So what I'm going to do is take my 5/8 deep well socket, and I'm just going to snug these down. Just kind of working my way from the inside out. I'm not going in any like crazy Hulk tight. I'm literally just wrist tight with this itty bitty ratchet. And if you're wondering about a torque sequence, basically on small block Chevys, it's about as easy as it gets. Because you just start in the middle and you kind of just do this. over and over again. It's just a big spiral. Think of it as just a spiral. That's how I do it. That's how I kind of keep track of things. I'm gonna go ahead and do it again, just to make sure. I mean, no, not tight at all. There we go. Now what I'm gonna do is set our thrust bearing, and it's really easy to do. You just take a rubber hammer and just tap the back and then tap the front. And that should set our thrust bearing, ensuring that it will work properly. Now our thrust bearing is set, we can actually tighten this down to our final torque value, which our inner main cap bolts torque spec is 70 and our outer is 65. Now for these Summit Racing ones, they just say the 7/16 bolts are 68. Honestly, you could probably do them all at 68 and just be fine, but I figure I'll give you the factory one as well. I'm just gonna do them all at 68. So before I go to 68, I'm gonna do in stages. As long as you break it up into 3 different stages, it's probably fine. I'm gonna start at 20 foot-pounds. So we'll start right here in the middle. And all I'm gonna do first is the inside caps, because all of the Chevys have those. And just go around in a circle, or not a circle, but a spiral. And we're just gonna go to 20 foot-pounds. And then I'm gonna come back and do the outside ones. Perfect, first stage is done. Now I'm gonna boost it up to, let's see, you don't have to be super scientific with this either. Let's do 50. Yeah, 50's good. So 50. There we go. And if you're using the stock bolts, this is where we diverge. Like I said, the inner caps are, the inner bolts are 70 and the outers are 65. I'm just gonna put them all at 68 because that's what my kit says to do. And again, you just go kind of in a spiral pattern. And it's very important not to get distracted. Close your garage, tell your friends to don't bug you, put your phone on silent. You can't get interrupted while doing this. And then just the inners, or excuse me, the outers, in a spiral. One more, finish strong. There we go. Wow, that looks amazing. Now you might have noticed that I did not check with Plastigauge what the bearing clearance was, and that's because the machine shop already did that for me. If you want to know how to do that, I have a link down below in the description on how to measure that. Typically in a garage situation like this, you don't usually need to. I don't want to, you know, say that for every single situation ever, but in my experience, just doing home garage builds, not like race car stuff, usually you can get away with not doing it if it passes this check where you should be able to grab the snout and you don't hear any like little, you don't hear any clearances. Move that around. Okay, now we are ready to spin the crankshaft. You are officially cleared and it's gonna be great. Watch. Oh yeah. I've built so many engines, and every time this is my absolute favorite part. Look at that. Look how nice that spins. Oh, it's buttery smooth. There's no clearances. There's no little tick-a-tick-a-tick noises. Oh, it is minty fresh. Look at that. I'm like a kid on Christmas. That is perfectly fantastic. Also, a quick note, I put the longer outer studs in the middle here because typically that's where a pickup wants to bolt to, but your pickup might be different, so you need to make that provision. I'm pretty sure that's the way mine goes. I don't have my pickup yet, But when I get it here, I'll be able to kind of test fit that. And if it's a problem, I can just remove this and transfer it to wherever it needs to be, but I'm pretty sure it's right there. So that is how to clean, paint, put the camshaft in and crankshaft in a small block Chevy. Now we are building a stroker engine. If you want to just build a 350, that's totally fine. Just use a regular crank, but you can use all the other parts. You just have a different crankshaft, that's it. Now let's talk about how much the machining costs. I get this comment kind of a lot of how much a machine shop will charge you. My machine shop charged me, right now in Southern California, to align hone it, stroker clearance the block, 30 over, hot tank, Magnaflux, balance the crankshaft, and balance the rods for about $938. That is how much they charged me. That's how much they're going to charge you. That is fairly typical. If you live in obviously, if you live in cheaper places, the machine shop work is going to be cheaper, but around $1,000, a little bit under, is fairly typical in today's market. This is a really fun project and it's really turning out very, very well. Thank you so very much for watching. If you found this video helpful at all, please consider becoming a member down below. It's a direct way to help the channel out. If you can't do that, I understand. Just liking and subscribing means the absolute world to me. Thank you so much again for watching. Thank you Summit Racing for sponsoring this series, and I'll see you next time.